We hear from companies on the environment. We hear from them on immigration. We hear from them on criminal justice, many important issues. But too many companies, too many corporate leaders are missing in action when it comes to gun safety.
Welcome to The Future We Want, a podcast for rebellious leaders ready to get to work, do the work, and create the future we want. I'm Raphael Bemporad, founding partner of BBMG, a branding and social impact agency that works with leaders that won't wait on things that can't wait. On today's episode, I'm joined by our dear friend and partner, Peter Ambler, the executive director of the gun safety organization, Giffords. Since co-founding Giffords with Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords and her husband, Navy Captain and now U.S. Senator Mark Kelly, Peter and their team have faced unimaginable tragedy with courage, determination, and grace, and they've worked together with people from all walks of life to lead the way toward meaningful progress. In our conversation, Peter shares their remarkable story, offers advice for how brands can affect public policy for good, and how he maintains his personal energy to keep fighting for change in the face of so much challenge.
Something else I've also learned from Gabby is to have humor and joy. It's mission critical. You have to do it.
Welcome to The Future We Want with Peter Ambler of Giffords. Hey, Peter, it is so good to see you. Thank you for joining us on The Future We Want.
My pleasure to be here and looking forward to talking about the future that we want.
Right on, brother. Well, by way of context, we met in late 2016 when the gun safety organization that you co-founded with Gabby became Giffords, and really a moment to chart the next chapter of your work and your impact. And we had the great honor of helping to design the brand and help build the movement that now has over 1 million members fighting for and advocating for stronger and safer gun laws. And you've helped pass over 400 gun safety bills in 45 states and Washington, D.C. And just this summer, you helped pass the first federal gun safety legislation since President Clinton was in office. And in just a great moment of celebration and honor, Gabby received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Biden, and a new feature film, which I absolutely love, premiered, Gabby Giffords Won't Back Down. It has been quite a journey, and I would love to start with your own journey as a human and the people and experiences that led you to this work and ultimately this moment of national significance and leadership in your work. So as you think about your journey, like who most shaped who you are in the world and what did you learn from them?
I don't think I am that different from most other people in terms of who shaped me. I don't have any type of unexpected or elegant, answer to this question, but I grew up in, I think, an interesting and wonderful community, El Paso, Texas, which is as far west as you can possibly get in Texas and tucked in on the border with Mexico, part of the binational community with Ciudad Juarez, right south of New Mexico. And, grew up with a loving family with two wonderful parents and a little sister. Went to public schools my whole life. I didn't go to the, any like fancy prep schools or anything like that. Then there weren't any in El Paso. But I think I took a lot out of my upbringing and my community. I was interested in, justice and politics from a very young age. I remember, I was born in 1981. I'm 41 years old. And I was interested enough in politics in the run-up to the 92 presidential election that there was a divide in my house where like my parents were Dukakis people, but I had my finger on the pulse of the nation and was, I think, more in touch with the future. And I was a big Bill Clinton boy. And obviously I had some foresight there that my parents lacked. I don't know, maybe that gave me confidence to sort of get a little bit more engaged in politics down the road. Went to Georgetown University, their School of Foreign Service, and then, being in DC, the sort of gravitational pull of politics took hold. I had originally wanted to sort of live a life sort of abroad, traveling the world, maybe as a journalist or an aid worker. But, my formative political experience, one that sort of shaped my political worldview and the worldview of many of my generation, was the Iraq War. So I was graduating from college in 2003, and, George Bush was pursuing what was seemed at the time to be dumb and unjust. And of course, it turned out to be a catastrophic invasion of Iraq. And, I sort of had a moment graduating then. I was like, oh, George Bush is so bad. I need to get involved in politics, in the sort of naive sort of way that a 22-year-old does. I thought like, oh, I'll join the Kerry campaign, write some speeches and, do some high level strategy stuff. So naturally I ended up as like a junior organizer in an Oklahoma Senate race, working out of Lawton, Oklahoma, in Grady County, Oklahoma, which was a humbling experience politically. But I returned to Washington, got a entry-level job, staff assistant job with my hometown member of Congress from El Paso, Sylvester Reyes, and worked in various roles in the House of Representatives until I was hired by Gabby Giffords. And I started in her office January 3rd of 2011, 5 days before she was shot. And if I'm to identify, an influence other than my parents on my life, and certainly the last almost 12 years of my life, I would say Gabby.
What happened where you thought, I don't want to only be in this for myself, but I want to be part of our democracy. I want to be part of what makes things better. Like, how would you describe that epiphany? And how, as you think about the arc of your work, how would you describe your calling? How would you describe your vocation?
I never had an epiphany. And I think I've been fortunate enough to have a series of opportunities to do interesting and impactful work that align with my values. If there's any way to sort of think about my vocation, I think it's through the lens of service. That's, I think, something that I was implicitly taught by my parents, and then explicitly by people like Gabby and her husband, Mark Kelly, for whom like service is like a really explicit part of their lives, right? And it's something that brought them together as a couple, and has always defined how they approach the world. And I joined with them and some other capable colleagues to start this gun safety organization. And we never thought about it as anything other than an act of service for the country.
Let's go back to that moment, if we could, and you can help people understand what was going on. It's January 8th, 2011. Gabby's hosting a constituent event outside a grocery store in the area of Tucson, Arizona. I think it's Congress at your corner.
Congress on your corner.
On your corner, yeah, welcoming everyone just to have conversations with the people who are there to represent them. And a gunman fired into the crowd. Gabby was shot nearly point blank in the head. 6 people were killed and 13 others were injured. A federal judge was lost. Your beloved colleague and staffer, Gabe Zimmerman, was lost. And a 9-year-old girl, Christina Taylor Greene, who wanted nothing more than to meet her representative and be part of democracy, was lost. As many of us know, Gabby sustained critical injuries. She was initially in a coma. She had tremendous brain surgery, very precarious, and weeks of intensive care, and began a long, courageous journey of rehabilitation. As you can see in the movie, like her spirit, her soul never wavers. It never changes at all. But you can also very intimately experience the physical difficulties with her, being partially paralyzed on the right side, or injuries that impaired her sight, her ability to speak. And you can see inside this journey just a human being navigating such difficulty while never losing her sense of self and never losing her love for those around her. So almost 12 years since that moment. I believe, as you mentioned, you were just a few days into your role as Deputy Chief of Staff in Gabby's DC office when this happens. So what happens on that day? What is happening in your mind and your heart when this goes down? Like, tell us a little bit about what you experienced and how that felt.
I think for me, the first thing that occurred to me, or my first pervading sentiment, was disbelief. Like, this can't possibly be happening. And I think about that a lot now, because so often these days, 12 years later, in the aftermath of like a school shooting, these kids in these schools will be interviewed and they'll be asked questions like, were you surprised that this happened? Are you shocked? And they'll say things like, no, I sort of expected it to happen. Mm. But to me, at that moment in history, it was shocking. And, as President Obama said in the documentary, Gabby Giffords Won't Back Down, it was the first major mass shooting of his presidency, or one of them. And I remember it was a Saturday morning. I was sitting at home. I remember it being a bright, cold morning in DC. I got, a phone call from a colleague. I think as Americans, like, we're used to the sort of breaking news alerts, that pop up on the Chiron on CNN, or that pop up on your phone, and you get that sinking feeling like, here we go again. But it's more personal for people who are, closer to the tragedy, right? You're getting firsthand reports, you're getting panicked phone calls. And that's how it was, obviously, for Mark, for our staff. I jumped in the shower, jumped in the car, got to our office in the Longworth House office building as quickly as I could. On the drive down, NPR reported her dead. And, it was I don't know, it was an indescribable feeling. I remember walking into the office, and several of my colleagues had, gotten there already, and they're slumped into corners. They've been working for Gabby for years. They've been working with Gabe and Ron Barber and others who are at the scene for a long, long time. They're devastated. And, Gabby was the sort of member of Congress that, you didn't work for her just because it was the next job. These folks felt like a deep commitment to, connection to, friendship with her. They were there because they believed in her. So it was all the more devastating for these folks. And as with any, trauma, as with any emergency, it was triage. I took a step back. I thought to myself, like, I'm devastated. I'm emotionally wrecked, but my distance from this tragedy is greater than that of my colleagues. And this gives me the ability to sort of do things that other people might not have the emotional bandwidth for. So I decided to put my head down, and I did whatever I could to, get in place the mental health resources for my colleagues and for others. To, the shooting happened on a Saturday. We opened the offices in both DC and Tucson on Monday because we knew that's what Gabby would want. And we spent the next several months, working in the district to continue to, serve her constituents, working with her colleagues to continue to push her priorities in Congress. One really cool thing that unfolded over that year was, stemmed from her commitment to bipartisanship. So Gabby was always ranked one of the most moderate and bipartisan members of Congress. She had to be coming from, the tough congressional district that she was in Tucson, but that's also like in her bones. Bringing people together, doing what's right for, the people, not because of any sort of political party, right? And she also had this policy where, I remember her sitting me down after she hired me. And I was her legislative director and deputy chief of staff, and she sat me down and said, "Peter, I have this policy. Every bill I introduced must have a Republican co-sponsor." And I was like, I thought, like, man, like, that is going to be a pain in the ass, right? Like, because that, a lot of what she wanted to do was motivated by some more progressive values. And it can be difficult finding a Republican to co-sponsor some of that. And if that's the sort of threshold for getting a bill introduced, it can be a high one to meet. But, we worked at it, we did it, me and many of my colleagues. And but then what happened, 5 days before she got shot on January 3rd was, John Boehner became Speaker of the House of Representatives. The Democrats were no longer in control. And, Gabby had a lot of friends on the Republican side as well. And so you had not just her Democratic friends, but, Republican friends who are now in the majority, who are chairs of committees, who are in positions of influence coming out of the woodwork saying like, oh, I'm co-sponsor of this bill with Gabby. How can I help you get this done?
Wow. What would you say as you look back on this almost 12 years, what have you learned about yourself and what have you learned about Gabby and anything bigger, just about life or politics? What are you carrying forward?
So that's a two-part question, and the first part of that is a lot harder than the second part, right? I may not be the most introspective person by nature, so I'll answer the second part first and see if I can come up with something like reasonably smart to say for what I've learned about myself. But what have I learned about Gabby? I have learned that she is the most relentless person on the face of this earth. And her survival is a miracle, right? Mm-hmm. The fact that, she was, shot through her brain from 3 feet away and survived is the stuff of miracles. There's something special out there, like looking out for her. But her recovery is completely the result of her relentless work. You see this in the film, Gabby Giffords Won't Back Down, which absolutely everybody should go rent on iTunes or Amazon or whatever, like tonight, right now. The amount of work that she puts into being able to do things that we take for granted, to be able to communicate, to be able to walk, is one of the most sort of inspiring. Knowing about that is one of the most inspiring things about my days, each and every day, knowing that for every word that I say, there's a Gabby Giffords in Tucson, Arizona, putting in thousands of hours of speech therapy to be able to, communicate just a little bit. And I think the spirit that is required to work so hard to be able to say just a little bit is remarkable. She was shot through the left side of her brain, so she's largely paralyzed on the right side of her body. But she goes to the gym for hours each and every week. She works in this she works out near Navy SEALs, and she's strapped to these weight sleds and so on and so forth. It's really wild. But something I think about a lot is the work that she puts in to just be able to lift her right arm progressively higher off the side of her body. And she will work for years and years and years, just be able to get another quarter inch and another quarter inch and another quarter inch. But the lesson there is that adds up, and that, one word at a time, one step at a time, a quarter inch at a time is how you recover from something as catastrophic as being shot through the brain. And I think that's a lesson that we can all take. And it's certainly a lesson that we've applied to our work in the gun safety movement, which I sort of refer to as radical incrementalism, knowing that if we're waiting for the silver bullet, we're going to wait forever. And that the only way that we're ultimately going to make progress is by putting one foot in front of the other.
There's a moment in the movie that just brought me to tears, and it begins with President Obama recounting so many of the tragedies on his watch. And it just sort of continues as you see the scenes in Aurora, Colorado, San Bernardino, California, the church in Charleston, South Carolina, the nightclub in Orlando, Florida, the concert in Las Vegas, Nevada, the Republican House member in Alexandria, Virginia, of course, Parkland, Florida, El Paso, Texas, this year, Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde. And in the face of so much despair, the interviewer turns to Gabby and asks, like, what do we do in the face of this? Like, where do we go from here? And she pauses for a long moment. And then she looks directly at the camera and she says, straight ahead, straight ahead. And you turn to her and you say, keep on fighting. And I'm goosebumps right now just thinking about it, in the spirit of that kind of resilience, that kind of commitment that you're describing. The tagline of Giffords is courage to fight gun violence. And I'm just curious, with all of it, what you're describing, what is courage? What does courage mean to you, and what might it mean to all of us?
I think it takes courage to keep on going, right? I think it takes courage. And you asked me, the first part of your question was, what have I learned about myself? And one of the things I've learned about myself, or at least learn to do, is to be able to set objectives and to go out and meet them, and knowing that if those objectives sort of add up, that you're going to be able to actually sort of have a win, have a victory, accomplish something at some point in the foreseeable future. Something else I've also learned from Gabby is to have humor and joy in doing that work. And I think that comes through in the documentary, obviously, right? Like, it's a lot of hard work, but she didn't treat it as a weighty obligation. She pursues it with joy and humor. And that's something we all have to find, especially if we're doing tough work, if we're trying to overcome steep obstacles. And I think, people feel bad about finding joy in darkness sometimes, but it's mission critical. You have to do it if you're going to sort of be able to sort of keep going and, achieve difficult things. I think it takes courage to tackle big problems. It takes courage to pursue an objective that is not in sight from the start line. I think, something that we're hardwired for as sort of humans, and certainly as sort of people who are higher achievers in society, we don't want to try and get something done that doesn't seem achievable, right? And one of our biggest adversaries in this fight against gun violence is cynicism. Yeah. And I think courage is an extremely important and underappreciated antidote to cynicism. Obviously hope is what everybody says. So you have to have hope in order to combat cynicism. And that's true, but sometimes hope isn't enough, right? You have to have the courage to keep on going when other people roll their eyes at you. And I'll admit, early on, Gabby and I would go from Senate office to Senate office. We launched Giffords in the beginning of 2013, trying to pass the Manchin-Toomey background checks bill. Mm-hmm. And, people told us Gabby, what you're doing is so important. But the politics are just too difficult. The NRA is too powerful. Are you sure you really want to take this on? We agree with you, but are you sure you really want to take this on? And because of her fortitude, because she had the courage to sort of see past that cynicism, and this is from our friends, right? These are people who are Democrats, who are moderate Republicans, who believe what we believe when it comes to gun safety. But many of them, and the sort of Democratic establishment at the time, fundamentally didn't think that change was possible. They looked at gun safety as a political third rail. You grab onto it, you get zapped. The NRA sells guns using fear, but they have achieved many of their political objectives through hopelessness and cynicism and perpetuating this idea that gun violence isn't solvable from a political or like a public safety or public health standpoint. They're wrong, but they were so successful for so long at perpetrating that belief. And I think it took a lot of courage for Gabby to sort of feel her way through the darkness at the beginning stages of building like the modern gun safety movement before we actually started, putting wins on the board and changing minds and showing that it's possible to beat the gun lobby and pass laws to stop gun violence.
What I really appreciate about two elements that you're saying. One is that you begin the journey not knowing the end, and that there's an arc of progress that you have faith in, but you don't know when it will come and you don't know how it will come. But just like her recovery, you just put one foot in front of the other with belief and don't back down, as the movie and the Tom Petty song inspires us to do. And on the other side is that you show up for each other. Part of that is, as you were saying, Republicans on the other side of the aisle showing up and standing with Gabby. But the other is like not seeing the people in buckets of their partisan, affiliations, but seeing human beings and all of us trying to get through life and so many ups and downs. And one of the domains of courage that I wanted to focus on, particularly in the context of our work at BBMG and the world of brands and business, is the role that business can play and the role that brands can play in supporting gun safety and being part of the movement. And there is a lot, I don't know, it may be cynicism, but it's definitely fear. A lot of brand leaders are thinking, well, if I say anything about this issue, I'll be alienating half of our customers. What's the right way? And I agree with, just like the tour going around in 2013, even your friends, even our friends are saying, I'm agreeing with you, but I can't do that. I can't alienate half of our customers. And, there have been big moments of progress. I mean, after Sandy Hook and what happened in El Paso in 2019, Dick's Sporting Goods ends the sale of assault rifles in their stores. Even Walmart, which is where the shooting in El Paso happened, isn't selling firearms to anyone under 21. Those are small bits of progress. Earlier this year, 250 CEOs signed a letter to senators calling for common sense gun reform. That's Levi Strauss and Lululemon, Patagonia, Unilever. But the vast majority of businesses are still kind of stuck between a belief that this is common sense and the right thing to do, and fear that they'll be called out, that they'll be, in somebody's tweet, or there'll be a backlash. And I'm curious, what is your message to business leadership? What is your message to brand leaders about this?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, sometimes I sort of vacillate back and forth. Like, what's my pitch to CEO? Is it like, have courage, or no, you don't need courage, right? Like, I mean, I think there were some business leaders, as you pointed out, that really led the way, right? Talk about Ed Stack, Dick's Sporting Goods. He said at a certain point, he's like, I don't want to sell these things. I'm taking assault weapons off the shelves. And I don't care, like, what it does to my bottom line, but I'm going to take that risk. But it turned out that he ended up selling enough golf balls and tennis balls that from a business standpoint, like it didn't too negatively impact Dick's. Look at Tom's Shoes, another one of our corporate partners, right? Yeah. They not only adopted a very strong campaign for background checks and for gun safety, but they put it front and center on their website at the beginning of the holiday shopping period, right? And they didn't have they might have had some idea concepts, but didn't have a roadmap. They didn't know exactly how that would, affect what's their busiest shopping period of the year. Levi's didn't, has a brand obviously as being sort of tough and Western, like, so how is advocacy around gun safety going to impact that? But time and time again, as corporate executives and brand leaders have stepped up and spoken out, they've done so with courage, but there hasn't been the backlash that they feared. Of course, you're going to get some Facebook messages. Of course, especially in a society that's as coarse as ours is today, there's going to be some very unkind language. But, that's more than made up for by the fact that, the part of the market that, brands really care about these days, that's younger, that has kids, that's more diverse, that's, spending money, that they are energized by the sort of social impact strategy. They want their companies to step up and speak out on this issue and on this issue specifically. And, you look at the examples of these companies that have done that, how they've not just survived, but flourished. We have polling and market research that shows exactly that. And then the flip side of that is not just the sort of market consumer side, but the employee side, right?
Yeah.
Because that's just as important, if not more important in a lot of ways for a lot of companies these days. The competition for talent is so fierce, and employees have very high expectations for the values and social impact strategies of their employers these days. Yep. And that's something that's very important to a lot of our, we have what's called the Giffords Impact Network. It's a collection of leading companies. You mentioned several of them. Lyft is another big one. We have financial institutions, one of the biggest healthcare companies in the country, in Northwell Health, and many others, who've all come together, each in their own authentic way, to associate their values with ours and be part of the broader solution around gun safety reforms. But I think they're all in various ways driven by the consciences of not only their executives, but their sort of broader employee communities. And I think it really helps retain and develop talent.
Right on. I remember watching Blake, I think is his name, from Tom's, on Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah.
And he and his wife have a young child at the time. And it was extremely powerful. And it was a moment where, and I think you're saying the same about Dick's Sporting Goods, where, we have power and influence through the megaphone and the voice of our brands, but also in the power of our businesses to be part of the change that we want and to build a society that we want to be part of. And that was very moving to watch Blake tell his own story. And it's not just Blake, like you're saying, it's employees and it's consumers increasingly. And as you mentioned from your research, which I had a chance to read about, 73% of Americans, think it is appropriate, if not very appropriate, for a company to take a stand and take action on gun safety measures. Like just, this isn't really that controversial for the vast number of people. Yeah. And as you mentioned, for those who are under age 30, it's even more so. It's close to 80%. And that's just showing that there is an opportunity here, not only to take a stand, but to, I ultimately think, build a brand that is more relevant, more meaningful, more authentic, whether that's employees or a generation of customers who are looking for leadership from brands.
Yeah. I think 5-10 years ago, it was have some courage, take a stand. Today, it's like, be a good follower, do what your consumers and your employees want you to do. It's just good business and it's good for the country. Something else for the business community to keep in mind is the destructive impact of the gun lobby's vision on society. We've done a lot of work calculating the cost of gun violence to society. And it is billions upon billions of dollars a year in this country. It is everything from the sort of direct costs on the medical sector and in the criminal justice sector and in other sort of public resources, to things like lost work days, or the fact that you can't open your business in a particular community because it's too dangerous. But then another thing for business leaders to think about is the fact that what the gun lobby and their allies in Congress and in other elected offices are fundamentally asking business leaders to do is to be the new arbitrators of gun policy in this country, right? They're taking down or working to take down laws that say where you can and cannot carry guns, and asking individual businesses to decide what the firearms policy is inside of their business, to put up signs, to train their employees on like what to do. And like, who wants to be in that position? I mean, think about how hard it was as a society to have, clerks and servers and hosts at restaurants, like, be the sort of enforcers of mask policy. Now sort of insert gun instead of mask. And good luck retaining a 25-year-old clerk at a store or a host at a restaurant if you're asking them to tell people whether they can or cannot carry firearms somewhere. The gun lobby, the NRA, many Republicans in Congress are putting business leaders in an impossible situation.
As we turn the corner into the fall of 2022, what is your invitation? What's your call to action to both, brands and business, but to everyone in America as we think about this particular election and what's ahead? What can we do now?
I think first and foremost, everybody, you can join us at Giffords. No matter what you do, whether you join us at Giffords, whether or not you're voting for a gun safety candidate, you should take away from this podcast that gun violence as a problem is solvable, that we have the political strength, as we just showed. We got 15 Republicans to vote for a narrow in scope but significant impact piece of legislation, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which President Biden signed into law this summer. And, these gun safety policies are also extremely effective. Starting 10 years ago, like you said in the beginning, we went to the states and we passed hundreds of pieces of legislation, 466 new gun laws in 45 different states. Today, though we have not passed universal background checks at the federal level, because of our efforts at the state level, half of the country's population is covered by a universal background check requirement. That wasn't the case before. And we know that, in states where you have universal background checks and other, strong gun safety laws, gun violence is significantly lower. That's not, coincidence or even correlation. That's cause and effect. It's because we're putting in place the tools to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them and are prohibited from possessing them. And that keeps our community safer. And, Gabby sort of likes to say, like, we never meet the people sort of whose lives we save, right? It's by definition unknowable. And it's hard to tell a story of hope through statistics. But, you look at some of these studies, and I think about a study that Johns Hopkins did. I always think about this particular one. In 2007, the state of Missouri repealed, this is long before Giffords was around, long before the sort of new strength of the gun safety movement. The Missouri had a permit to purchase universal background checks law on the books. And though it wasn't unpopular by any means, the gun lobby decided that it had to go. And because of their strength in the state, the legislature repealed it. And that was a tragedy for the state, but it did allow a team of researchers from Johns Hopkins to go in and in a controlled way look at what the results were. So, the evidence was, peer-reviewed, published academically, that as a direct result of this change in policy, gun violence in the state of Missouri went up 25%, which, if you look at the human cost of that, is roughly 70 people every single year that die in the state of Missouri who otherwise would not. Hundreds of people over the years. Conversely, you look at the state of Connecticut, they did the opposite. In the 90s, they put in place a law like that, permit to purchase universal background checks law that they hadn't had before. And as a direct result of that policy shift, gun homicides declined 40%, saving hundreds and hundreds of lives. So if you're telling me that policy can't solve this problem, that policy cannot have a life-saving impact on our lives and on our communities, you're crazy. And if you look at everything that we've managed to do, passing, hundreds of gun laws across the country, getting 15 Republicans to support, strong gun safety laws, you telling me that it's the politics are too hard? you're crazy. You're just looking for reasons to be cynical. And I think what this, achievement in the Senate, the 15 Republicans who came together to support this deal, what that all shows us is that the consensus is shifting, right? When we started Giffords, the consensus was that the politics were too difficult. I think now the consensus has got to be that this is something that all Americans, despite like what you might hear from one extreme or another, are saying all Americans can come together in order to support gun safety reforms. And that doesn't just mean politicians. That means that, the corporate world has to come off the fence on the gun safety issue, and I'll be candid and direct. We've had some courageous leaders, but by and large that they haven't. We hear from companies on the environment. We hear from them on immigration. We hear from them on criminal justice, many important issues. But too many companies, too many corporate leaders are missing in action when it comes to gun safety. And honestly, the same thing is true for many people in the philanthropic world. A lot of old foundations have refused to develop gun violence prevention programs for years and years and years. We've been lucky enough to raise a budget that's roughly $30 million a year. We have 80 members of our staff that are working each and every day, going 150, 200% fighting for safer gun laws. But the NRA, as weakened as it is, it still has a budget that's hundreds of millions of dollars. The gun industry spends billions of dollars every year just on marketing. And they're not selling hamburgers. They're selling political ideology wrapped around the barrel of a gun. And that's dangerous.
With all of those challenges, you are mentioning correctly that, look, this is solvable. And if there's ever been a time, this is a moment to believe. And as we think about, our podcast is called The Future We Want. And the whole premise of it is, as we're navigating out of a pandemic, as we're looking at intractable issues, whether it's climate or income inequality, racial justice, gun safety, these are solvable issues. They're solvable issues. And what it takes is that human beings begin to see one another and hear and understand one another, appreciate differences and not try to, solve for differences, but appreciate differences and find ways forward together. And I'm just curious, my mantra from you and Gabby's leadership will always be straight ahead, and keep on fighting. And that, arc of change, we don't see the finish line, but we know the path, and you're walking it. And so I just have so much appreciation for you, Peter, for Gabby, for the entire team at Giffords, for Mark. This was nothing that you asked for on the morning of January the 11th. But it's a moment that you've met and that you continue to meet with just so much heart and so much love. So with that all in mind, this is a moment of belief. As you think about the future that you want, how would you describe the future you want?
I'm, maybe I'm not the most inspiring person in the world, but I'm certainly realistic. And what I think is a realistic future for us to work towards is a future where you see declining rates of gun violence. You think about it in the context of other threats to our health and safety, whether you're talking about tobacco or automobiles. We have saved millions of lives from, death and injury related to automobiles and tobacco use over the years through, sustained and myriad policy endeavors. The same thing is what we can do on firearms. We're not going to take a situation where this past year we had 49,000 gun deaths and bring it to zero in a year or 2 years or 10 years. But what we can do is take that stubborn line, right? That line on the graph and bend it down. That is the way to do it. And that is the orientation that we should have as leaders in government and leaders in the corporate space, in the medical space, everywhere. What can we do each and every day, whether we're crafting policy or, using our influence to reach a broader sort of cultural group of people shifting behavior, what can we do to make each year just a little bit safer than the last? And it might not seem like enough. And tragically, to so many people, it won't be, because people are going to continue to die unnecessarily from firearms. But what we can do is save tens of thousands of lives in a relatively short amount of time by simply asking ourselves, what can we do to make next year safer than the last? And that's what we do each and every day at Giffords. So in the same way that, Gabby finds one word and then another that's allowed her to speak and have such a powerful voice, that she takes one step and then another. She lifts her arm, a quarter inch and then another quarter inch, which allows her to have, participate in 30-mile bike races across Tucson. That is how we move forward, one step at a time, one quarter inch at a time, one law, $1, one act of courage and advocacy at a time. So join us, Giffords.org, because we're optimistic that we're going to see significant change on the gun safety issue in the years ahead.
Amen, my brother. Amen. I believe, and I'm all in to bend that arc. Thank you so much, Peter, for your leadership, for your example, and you and Gabby and the team just for helping us believe again, and just that courage to walk the path 1 inch, one step at a time. Thank you so much, my friend. It's a joy to see you. I couldn't be more proud and more excited for what's ahead.
I loved working with you on our brands. You and the team at BBMG, wonderful leaders and experts and great collaborators. And this was a fantastic conversation. I look forward to what's next.
Right on, brother. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to The Future We Want from BBMG. We've been speaking with Peter Ambler, Executive Director of Giffords, Courage to Fight Gun Violence. You can learn more about their amazing work by visiting Giffords.org, and I highly recommend checking out the new documentary, Gabby Giffords Won't Back Down, where you can learn more about Gabby's journey and her amazing and courageous work. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The Future We Want is produced by Liz Courtney. Original music and audio production is by Go Destroy Art. See you in the future.